There were two incidences that could have been embarrassing, but we just threw our hands up and went, whatever. One was when Lee split his pants just before a meeting. So what are you going to do? You're just going to go with it. He ran into the toilet, stapled up his pants, came out, very uncomfortable couple of hours, presenting with staples sticking into his backside.
We were a team right there. I mean, I was the guy with the staple. We're like, come on, we're going in there. And they saw teamwork. They saw resilience. They saw a sense of humor. And they saw get on with it.
Welcome to Any Insights Yet? The podcast that explores the intersection of strategy, inspiration, and branding. I'm Chris Kocek. On today's episode, we talk about mental health brands and the power of resilience with Mark DiMassimo and Lesley Bielby at DiGo Brands out of New York City. DiGo Brands isn't just another ad agency. Their focus is on creating positive behavior change. And over the past 28 years, they have been fulfilling their mission, helping brands who are trying to make a positive difference in people's lives. Brands like Weight Watchers, the Partnership to End Addiction, Crunch Fitness, HelloFresh, and BetterHelp, among many others. As you can imagine, working on these kinds of brands can be challenging because you have to tackle some difficult subjects with potential customers. Therapy in particular comes with all kinds of taboo topics or cultural associations. But Mark and Lesley are masters at deciphering people's metaphors and getting to those aha moments that can change people's minds and behaviors. Our conversation takes some interesting twists and turns as we explore the real meaning of embarrassment, as well as the holy trinity of humility, humanity, and humor to solve complex branding problems. We also explore some fascinating findings from the world of behavioral science and how strategists are often a critical bridge between the science and the art of advertising. To get things started, though, I wanted to know which projects have been most challenging for Mark and Lesley and what they did to work through them. What's one of the strangest or most challenging projects you've ever been asked to work on?
I've actually got a couple, and they both involve below the belt, so I don't know how far into this I can go. I worked in a brand. It was basically a procedure that you could get to help with vaginal laxity. The thing that I love most about this project, firstly, interviewing women about vaginal laxity was quite a blast. But the thing I loved the most was the researcher that ran my research department at this particular agency was a very sweet guy that had very ministerial qualities. And just hearing him have to say the word vaginal every 5 minutes in the report, I just couldn't hold it together. So that was probably the strangest one that I've ever worked on.
That's amazing. Mark, how about you?
We worked for Pfizer back in the day, and we did a wonderful, Nike level aspirational campaign for people with urinary incontinence. And it was called the Life Beyond the Bathroom campaign. So for folks who just aspire to being able to live more than 500 feet from a restroom and feel okay about it, very fun.
So you both started off with a below the belt situation.
What does that tell you about us?
You get Lesley and I together and we're very classy, but somehow, yes.
So how do you get started in a research project like that when you're talking to someone? How do you ease in to those topics?
Well, you just go straight at it. I don't think there's any kind of point in warming up the consumer when you're talking about something quite so personal. I think you just got to go straight for it, honestly. So the question you would ask would be, what are some of the problems that you experience as a woman that has problems with vaginal laxity, and just let them go for it. I think that's really important in all research, actually, to start the research without, hey, do you have any pets? Tell me about your children. But to go straight for the jugular and straight to the heart of the issue, because that way the respondent or consumer will say, okay, that's the kind of conversation that we're going to have right now. So you're setting up the precedent and setting up the tone.
Mm-hmm. Now, switching gears here, you guys have done some amazing work for BetterHelp, above the belt, above the shoulders.
Yeah.
It's an online therapy website that connects people with professional licensed therapists. What's one of the insights or aha moments that came up during your research on BetterHelp, and how did that come about?
BetterHelp, it's not the largest online therapy brand. It's the largest therapy brand in North America. So,
I think in the world at this point.
yeah, it has an impact on a lot of people. And there are whole communities where getting therapy or counseling is a taboo. It's just whole communities that awareness alone isn't going to solve the problem because the taboo is so strong.
So when we started working with BetterHelp, they were an unbelievably successful brand. Obviously, they were fulfilling a huge need, not only in American culture, but across the globe. There aren't enough therapists to go around. There just aren't. If you want to get into a profession today, that's the one to get into. So there was nothing wrong with their business, but what they were doing is they had a huge overdependence on social media, social advertising, particularly Facebook. And when we talked to them about that, we said that's going to become a problem because, first of all, the stuff that they were running on Facebook was getting worn out. Secondly, their cost per acquisition was going through the roof. And so that was happening because people are looking for a therapist online. They're going to find BetterHelp because it's everywhere and it will follow you. It'll retarget you and get you. But if you are on the fence and there's competition out there, we wanted to make sure that people went to BetterHelp first. And so we wanted them to have a sense of the brand, which at that time hadn't really been established. They'd built a fantastic, brilliant business, but they hadn't really built a brand. So we said that the way that we begin to build a brand is we talk to prospects. And because we had limited budgets to do research, we said, let us speak to the prospects that are the hardest people to attract to therapy. And we first of all started with a bunch of stakeholder interviews with some of their therapists were very generous with their time and told us, well, Black men, number one, Asian men, number two, Hispanic men, number three. So we did focus groups, online focus groups, because this was during COVID with different ethnic groups. And we started them the way that I mentioned before with what is so hard about being a man in America today. Rather than any warm up, we went straight for the jugular. And they started talking. It was a lot of trepidation, in particular with the kind of the Black male group. And people were really uncomfortable talking about some of the issues pertaining to them and very uncomfortable talking about, you ever considered therapy for something like that? I would never go to a therapist. My parents would say, why don't you just go talk to the pastor? Or my girlfriend would think that I was less of a man. Or people would think there was something wrong with me. And then something really interesting happened. The alpha male in the group, which was a big footballer, said, you guys, I'm surprised at this conversation. I've been in therapy for 2 years and it's changed my life. And it's made me a better man, a better partner, a better son, a better father. And I would highly recommend it. And because he opened his mouth and said that, the conversation completely changed at that point. People wanted to know, why did you go? How did you get your therapist? How did it change your life? Give us more detail. I really just became a witness to this thing that was unfolding in front of me and the other planner that I was working with. And so the insight from that really turned into one of the most successful ads that we put on the table. We created a series of ads. Some of them are funny, some of them are really serious. But there was one that we created where we had a Black guy in a gym helping a Hispanic guy trying to lift a weight who did not want his help. Says, I'll be all right. Just leave me alone. I'm okay. That looks heavy. You need help.
While he's being slowly crushed by the barbell, he's like, I don't need help.
The whole line is sometimes you just need a little help. Overselling BetterHelp to that group in particular would have been a mistake, but just letting it unfold and letting that metaphor become what it was meant to become was successful for them and for us.
Mark, was there anything you wanted to add to that in terms of the somersault from the strategic idea to the creative, any other creative executions that you thought really brought this metaphor home?
The story spot that Lesley just talked about, there's a certain amount of humor and seeing just the absurdity of somebody not accepting a help in a situation where not accepting help probably going to be fatal. That was human, relatable, present, almost real, but had this humorous, absurd aspect. We also tried to go after American archetypes of independence. We had a cowboy, severely injured, physically injured cowboy who refused to take any help, and it was absolutely absurd. And we got great reactions in both cases. But what we heard played back was the more personal, that Jim spot Lesley talked about. I would say 5 times out of 6, people would tell me they saw that and it meant something to them.
Lesley, were there any other data points or was there any other findings that left a lasting impression on you about the mental health category?
Yeah, first of all, mental health is a crisis. And we were doing this work during COVID. It was not lost on any of us that this is an epidemic that our country is facing with mental health. And people aren't getting the resources that they need. And so it made no sense to us that they weren't taking advantage of this resource that is more affordable, more flexible, more available. And by the way, really importantly, where there were diverse therapists. So you could pick someone that looked like you, that sounded like you, that spoke your language, or not. The choice is entirely up to you. The lack of diversity within the therapy community was extremely visible. And BetterHelp resolves that because it attracts people from all different kind of ethnicities and backgrounds. The other thing is that the devastating effect that somebody who is in need of therapy, the effects it can have on the whole family. When this person is in a bad place, it affects your marriage, it affects your children, it affects all the relationships that you have with people that are close to you. It doesn't just affect one individual, it can infect an entire network of individuals. So it's an epidemic, and it's in particular an epidemic with young people.
Chris, I had mental health issues in my early 20s. I had terrible generalized anxiety, panic attack disorder. And that kind of started me off on a journey that included 17 years of therapy. It really put me on this road to what we call positive behavior change, to wanting to work on things that help people, that leave people better, that help people change their lives for the better.
Yeah. You probably know this. At Gallant, we have this unofficial tagline, building brands for a better world. That is our raison d'etre, right? And I think when I found you guys, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a kinship here. We share the same goal. And I have found that putting out that beacon to the world, this is what we do. This is who we are for. This is how we help those kinds of brands. It attracts those kinds of brands, right? They find you because you're sending that signal out into the world. So I love all the work that you guys have done. And we are going to be talking about some of the other brands. Before we get to that, though, we've talked a lot about the idea of embarrassment, right? And so the question I have for you, and there's no right answer, I just want to hear what you guys think. What do you think embarrassment is? In 1 or 2 sentences, how would you define what embarrassment is?
I think embarrassment is shame, the shame of being weak. There's such a lot of shame associated with going to therapy over here that it's just not talked about. It's incredible. After all these years, there's still a stigma attached to it. But I think it's to do with the way that we're raised. If we're raised not to be confident in who we are and having high self-esteem, at the end of the day, it's all about self-esteem. Then we don't have the confidence to stand up and say, you know what, sometimes people need help, and I'm one of those people right now. That would be high self-esteem. It's the shame of showing weakness.
Mark, your experience or your take on that?
Embarrassment is vulnerability. It's unplanned, emotional, ego vulnerability.
Can I jump in with another one?
Yeah.
There's another type of embarrassment, which is less to do with shame and more to do with the flushing of the face when people show kindness. So it's almost like being coy. I'm embarrassed because people are saying nice things about me. That's a different kind of embarrassment.
If you don't feel worthy of attention or positive attention, and people call attention to you, they put you on the spot. And again, you're vulnerable. You're like, oh, now my ego is on display, and I'm not confident that my ego is supportable.
I just love this process in terms of building this definition, building this idea in real time. So Mark, you said it's vulnerability, and then you started adding some adjectives behind it to say it's unplanned, emotional, ego vulnerability. And Lesley, picking up on what you're saying, there's a component, it seems, with embarrassment. There have to be others around. People don't get embarrassed with themselves by themselves. There's always an other component, right? Doing this in front of others, what others might think. So now here's the second question around embarrassment. What do you think is the key to unlocking or releasing embarrassment? We're going deep.
We are going deep. My goodness, this is like therapy. The key to unlocking it is just letting people feel comfortable enough to be their true selves.
Mark, have you ever found a way, if in a moment of embarrassment, how do you release yourself from that moment of embarrassment? How do you allow yourself to stop being embarrassed?
Humor definitely works for me. But I learned part of what I think opened the door to positive behavior change for me is I learned the power of humility, how it opens the door to change. If you can't take yourself lightly, then it's very hard to accept the truth. I have to restart several times every day where I just have to say, oh shit, I got that wrong.
So can I mention a couple? And Mark, you tell me if you're okay with me saying this.
No, embarrass me.
So the middle time I worked for DiGo, we were doing so many pitches, so many new business meetings. I swear we were doing quite often 3 a day in New York. That me, Mark, and Lee, and sometimes others, sometimes just the 3 of us would trudge from place to place to place. And there were 2 incidences that could have been embarrassing, but we just threw our hands up and went, whatever. One was when Lee split his pants just before a meeting.
He had gotten this new suit. And I suppose in retrospect, it might have been just one size too tight, but he looked fantastic. But we had a stack of boards, and it was a bank, by the way. So everybody's dressed to the nines and formal. And he just leans down to pick up the boards, and everyone can hear it.
Yeah. So what are you going to do? You're just going to go with it. He ran into the toilet, stapled up his pants, came out, very uncomfortable couple of hours, presenting with staples sticking into his backside.
Yes.
And so that these things make for great stories. The other one was...
Wait, I have to tell the end of the story.
Oh, you tell me the story.
We won the account.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
We won the account. That was the final, and we won that pitch.
Because they said the one with the guy who split his pants. They knew exactly who we were.
That, and because I think you guys show that under pressure, you solve problems. You don't panic.
There you go.
You just get the job done. And that's a very innovative way of doing it. Staple your pants together.
We were a team right there. I was the guy with the staple. We're like, come on, we're going in there. And they saw teamwork. They saw resilience. They saw a sense of humor. They saw get on with it.
Yeah. And then the other one was when we went to one investment firm, sold our creds, and then went to the next one, and Mark kept calling the next one by the first one's name.
Yeah.
And Lee and I looked at each other and thought, what are we going to do? We just sat there and we just lived with it for the next hour.
I don't think we won that one.
Mm-hmm. We didn't win that
one. But it sounds like there's a Texas two-step perhaps between humor and humility. Those two things are a really powerful combination in business, in advertising work, and in everything. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I actually think it makes work more fun. And secondly, it's humility and humanity. I really do think that's what makes you win as well. I think you said it earlier, Chris. Clients that sense that this is a team that really like each other, that have fun together, they want to be part of that. Mm-hmm. When there's an assumption that if you get on so well with each other, that you're going to be really good at digging out insights from consumers and getting the best creative out of the creatives and everybody else in the team, and getting the best work out of clients also.
You've won a bunch of awards for your work. You've won Effies. And a lot of your work is rooted in the latest research around behavioral science. For our listeners who may not be familiar with behavioral science, would you mind just sharing in a nutshell what behavioral science is or what it's all about?
It's all the collection of sciences that try to understand why people do what they do. They want to understand behavior, what predicts it, and all of that. Why do we need behavioral science? Why can't we just say what we mean and mean what we say? Why doesn't just pure, unstrategic authenticity work? Because people are predictably irrational. And therefore, there's both science and art to helping people get what they're looking for and what you're looking for from communication, design, et cetera. So behavioral scientists today include behavioral economists who focus their behavioral science on economic behavior. Why do people choose what they choose, pay what they pay, buy what they buy? from the economic lens. Social psychologists, why do people behave the way they do in groups? Why do they think what they think about groups? Why do they feel what they feel about other people when they're social? And we could go on and on. But what I have found in spending a lot of time with them is that the very things that make a great behavioral scientist make a terrible strategist. So our job is to learn from them, but we don't put a behavioral scientist in the center of developing the strategy. But they can bring scientifically tested principles, like, for example, here's a simple one. If you want to emphasize that a price is lower, put that price physically further away from the old price in the layout. That people predictably conflate distance with difference. It's a little thing, but they have lots of little learnings about perceptual glitches that we have. And so we study those, we learn from those, we get together with behavioral scientists and what we can learn. And we ask them to look at what we've done and give us comments about it. Have you thought about making that lower price just a little further from the previous price? People will think it's lower or act as if they think it's lower. Okay, sure. So there are a lot of learnings, but then integrating them into a strategic brain that can turn around, as Lesley does so brilliantly, and make it simple. Scientists can't do that. They can do it for their careers and maybe for the paper that they're working on, but they can't really do it for clients.
So you guys are the conduit or the translators from the behavioral science. You're the bridge to get to something simple and elegant.
Between the problem and the behavioral science, and between the behavioral science and the solution. That's us.
Any other really quick examples of one of your favorite things, like the distance equals greater difference?
Can we go back to that better help case? So we found that there were whole markets that were underserved, and we found that taboo was the reason. But then we had to consider strategies together. And one strategy was, we're going to democratize mental health care. Another was to identify the taboo, basically, and say, we understand you have this feeling about this, but here's how you're going to overcome it. What we found was that that's why these other examples, like the gym, it's obvious if you're being crushed by a barbell that you need help. You don't feel embarrassed, right? So we went at the irrationality of it, but we lowered the stakes. Behavioral science basically says that kind of lowering of stakes works. And the advertisers often want to raise the stakes. You're suffering so much, you don't have to suffer, right? But the truth is, this is just a little irrationality. You'll feel so much better. Get yourself the help. It worked so much better. So that was informed. But would a behavioral scientist have given us that strategy? I don't think so. I think it took Lesley and planners and strategists to give us that strategy.
That's why I'm so fascinated by comedians and what I like to call comic insights, right? So the one difference between comedians and what you guys do is you guys have to help solve the problem, or your brands have to help solve the problem. But what comedians are so great at is that they identify the tension, or they identify the situation that is absurd, where everybody would be like, oh my gosh, that's me. I'm so ridiculous sometimes. And then we laugh at ourselves. That's a really powerful position to be in as a comedian or as an agency, to find those situations that allow people to let their guard down, laugh a little bit, and then take an action.
Amen. We did a great thing in the world of positive behavior change for Crunch Fitness back in the day. And we realized with Crunch Fitness that young professionals after work, they either went out to a nightclub, or they went and sat on their couch and watched cable TV, or they went to the gym. And we wanted more of those evenings. That was the whole goal. Did we do it by being sanctimonious? Did we do it by talking about the benefits of fitness and all of that? No, we did it by being more insightful and entertaining. So when we introduced kickboxing, which was a super entertaining thing right in the middle of the gym, we did a contest that was based on a comedian's insight, which is that people are really resentful about It seems quaint now, millionaires. Now it would be billionaires, but back then it was millionaires. We did a Who Wants to Kick a Millionaire's Ass contest. And we ran Who Wants to Kick a Millionaire's Ass contest entry forms where people could win the opportunity to get into the real ring for a televised bout with a millionaire. We did a survey of whose asses people most wanted to kick.
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not, 20 years ago, Donald Trump was the top of that list. Bill Gates was number 2. So this shows brand management here, because I don't think Bill Gates would be as high anymore. But we'd also have insights about why they were sitting on the couch. We had a washroom workout series with exercise diagrams of all the muscles they engaged with non-toilet seat touching deep knee bends. So they would be like, oh, it'd be fun to go over to Crunch. And God, boy, did it work. It went from a single exercise studio. It became the top fitness brand in the country before it was then sold and ruined.
Well, that's a story for another day. I love all these examples, by the way. One of my favorite techniques for getting closer to an insight is interrogating language. And when you think about some of the brands you guys have worked on, can you remember a particular situation where you heard a word or a phrase and you just thought, what does that really mean? I want to dig in to that word. Or maybe how could we flip that on its head and make it mean something else or something totally unexpected? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not a word, but a phrase.
Sure.
So one of the things that we've lost a little bit post-COVID is we tend to do more online focus groups. We do more survey-based research, more social listening, that kind of stuff. That's all really important, but there's still nothing that beats sitting in somebody's living room talking to them or going to the store with them or basically spending time with them in their own natural environment. Worked in a few luxury car brands, but this was like the ultimate luxury car brand, dream cars. And I interviewed a lot of millionaires or close to millionaires that were driving these $100,000 to $200,000 cars. And there was one guy in particular Hispanic guy, second generation, who invited me into his home, beautiful home. First thing I noticed when I drove up the driveway in my own little car is that his luxury car was not in one of the 4 garages. It was sitting right there and it had just been cleaned. So that's number one. This is really important to him. And then when I get into the house, he makes a point of taking me the long way to his living room so I can clock some of the stuff in his house. When we get into the living room, we sit down, we start the interview, I start recording. And I say, tell me about, what does success mean to you? And he said, it's not about money. It's not about money at all. The trimmings of success are not important to me. What's important to me, and he points to pictures of his family, is my family and spending time with them and making sure that they're happy and educated and well. But at the same time, it's starting to get dark. It's about 6:00 in the afternoon. It was in winter. And I noticed that he flipped the lights on outside and there's this enormous swimming pool. So it's almost as if the words were coming out of his mouth that why money wasn't important to him, why the trappings of wealth were not important to him, why the luxury car that he was driving was not important to him. What was important to him is that it kept his family safe. And at that point, I think I had enough because I realized this was all for show. What was coming out of his mouth was not reflecting what he was showing me with his body language and his movements and his actions. So I remember saying to him, if safety is the most important thing to you, then why don't you just drive a Volvo? And then he said, okay, you got me there. And then the whole conversation changed. So it was less a word and more I've got to challenge this. I've got to challenge this, not in a way that's rude, but in a way that might entice a chuckle, which it did. And then we had a real conversation. Like, tell me about your past. Why do you drive this gorgeous car? Why do you live in this gorgeous house? Why is the pool so important to you? And it all came out. A second generation Hispanic, born dirt poor. His parents came over and they didn't speak English. And the story unfolded that this was all about proving to himself and others that his worth. And so I think a lot of the time, as I've said a few times in this discussion, it's just calling it like it is in a kind way.
Mm-hmm. So you used humor to disarm a little bit.
Humor and a little bit of, I guess, that why don't you just drive a Volvo? He wasn't prepared for that because I've been very polite to that point. But this kind of show, it got to a point where I thought, I've got to say something because clearly he doesn't mean any of this. It was gentle humor, but it was disarming. And in that moment, he decided to switch it to something else. He also said something really interesting, and this is one of my favorite insights of all time. I said, at what point in wealth, what is the number where things change for you? And every single millionaire that I interviewed said the same thing, 10 million. And when I said, why is it 10 million? They said, because at 10 million, you become yourself. And I thought that was fascinating. What do you mean you become yourself? Until 10 million, you are being whatever anybody wants you to be. If you're in the corporate world, if you're an entrepreneur, you're basically grabbing and growing and sticking your elbows out and really pushing for success. But when you hit 10 million, you don't have anything to prove anymore. So you just become who you really are. And I noticed that with interviewing people, luxury car owners, people that were ultra high net worth individuals, that was a consistent theme with 100% of them.
You've got to be part of the 3 comma club.
So, Chris, I've got 3 quick stories in it that I'd love to give you an answer to your question. There, 3 sounds like a lot, but they're quick. And because your question about looking at language, I'm a writer. I'm a strategic writer. Thinking about words, and our marketing landscape is cluttered with language that people have become noseblind to, that they don't even realize the words in their name anymore. It ceased to be meaningful for them, and yet the whole world is seeing it. So I'll give you 3 examples. The first one is, for 25 years, I've been working with, and we are currently working with, the Partnership to End Addiction. It used to be the Partnership for a Drug-Free America. Then it was the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. Now it's the Partnership to End Addiction. I've been in the middle of all of those sort of reframing and renamings as the world has changed. But at some point, just looked at it and said, what does partnership mean? When it was formed, it was really a partnership between media companies and the advertising industry. It really was a partnership, right, in order to do something about drugs when it first started. But that long since broke down, and yet partnership was still in the name. So what does it mean? We ended up working together with a whole campaign. The best way to fight addiction is connection. The answer to addiction is connection, and it's family connections. So we activated that partnership word, and we activated it again at every level in the name. We are currently working with a brand called the Good Feet Store. These are systems of arch supports that change people's lives. People experiencing back pain, people experiencing hip pain, knee pain. The insight there is that the problem comes from the feet. It's the way that the feet meet the ground that is causing so much of this problem for so many people. And once you realize that we're really making people's lives better from their feet on up, and you look back at the name, you're like, Good Feet is right in there. As your feet go, so your life goes. So your life experience goes. So that when you have good feet, it leads to a good life. So again, those words were right there, but you wouldn't be shocked, because you do this, how little of the conversation, meaning 0 in the beginning, focuses on what do we mean? Our name is the thing we put out in the world, our brand. What do we mean by that? And how do we activate that? Third is, I think, a particularly brilliant thing that Lesley led in terms of the discovery that unlocked all the value that took a distant second in this meal delivery category, HelloFresh, and turned them into a number 1. And it's the hardest thing in the world. Pepsi's been trying to chase Coke for years. How do you go from number 2 to number 1? And so we looked at the number 1 Blue Apron, and we said, all right, it's a new category. It's a category that sort of started from the top with sort of a prestigious, slightly gourmet, slightly more expensive product. There's an opportunity for HelloFresh to become bigger and more successful by winning the whole middle of the pyramid. A little less expensive, a little more cheerful and accessible, right? There's the opportunity. But then the next step in the planning was, when we looked at the competitive, the big insight was that everybody was talking about fresh. That fresh was the entry level to the category. There was Fresh Direct, and there was HelloFresh, and they're every Garden Fresh, and all these fresh brands. But Lesley came back and said, and I'll never forget it because we made a lot of money for them and a little bit for us doing it. She said, hello is the word that makes all in this brand name. And look at the design. We redesigned it to emphasize the hello. We built the whole brand on hello, the whole brand. And that's how they got to be number one.
Lesley, can you add to that in terms of how did that light bulb go off for you that it's not about fresh, it's about hello?
The foundation that Blue Apron had set up, it was a little bit more premium, that the ingredients were more special. It was the kind of thing that you might do in a date night with your partner. And so it was really more kind of high-end kind of restaurant quality foods, whereas hello was about, no, sometimes you're just exhausted when you get in from work, but you don't want to throw a pizza in the oven. You want to actually sit down and have a proper meal with your family and maybe cook it with your family. The kind of research that we did showed us that this makes me feel like a better parent. That was another important insight. Makes me feel like a better partner, whether you're male, female, same sex, different sex couples, because I feel as if I'm actually contributing something, even though it's all been prepared for me and all I'm doing is really tossing it into a pan and mixing it together and serving it. That feeling that's just inherently human of preparing food for others. Food is love at the end of the day. That was at the heart of it. It's the approachable nature, the fact that it gets us back to our roots, our humanity, and pulled families together.
That's a really interesting metaphor that you're using, right? Because in our society, we often say food is fuel, right? Grab and go. And the fuel you put in your body, you're like a sports machine. You're always on the go. But you just said food is love, and that's a very different framing, right?
It is. I think that nowadays, the kind of the quantifiable self, the fact that we're looking at our Fitbits and our apps, we're looking at our heart rates and analyzing the amount of calories that we're burning and the amount of calories that we need to intake to lose weight. We've become machines and have really lost our humanity. But you only have to go to countries like Italy and Spain and some parts of the south of France and others to know that food is still love. It's at the heart and soul of everything. And not just the eating of, but the production of, the development of, the nurturing of, the love of, the preparation of food is still there.
This also reminds me, I remember hearing years ago someone talking about newspapers and that newspapers became obsessed with the second half of their name, papers, and they lost sight of the fact that they're in the news business.
Just building on that, we got the assignment to save the Reader's Digest. So it was really a full-on rethinking and relaunching. And it worked. The core of it, to shift from Digest, which, by the way, had been completely surpassed by the internet and Google and Apple News and all of that, right? To shift, and yet still on their cover, Digest was emphasized, Readers was minimized. We shifted from Digest to Readers, and we built our whole brand for people who love to read and just don't have much time, right? On the basis of that and a few other insights, we were able to relaunch that brand successfully.
That reminds me of Cigar Aficionado, not that I'm a subscriber, but Cigar Aficionado, when they started out, cigar was huge and all the emphasis was on cigars. And then over time, you got to watch cigar get smaller and smaller until it became just aficionado.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Because that's a much bigger platform to work from because you can be an aficionado of anything at that point. So.
Absolutely. And cigars are just part of the aficionado lifestyle, right?
Exactly.
Fine Corinthian leather.
A bon vivant.
Yeah.
All right. So before we get to our speed round, I'd love to ask one more question about jobs that you both have done that have helped you do your current job better. Lesley, what is a job that you've had in the past that has helped you do your work as a strategist even better?
Yeah. So fairly early into my career, when I was about 5 or 6 years into being a planner in the UK, so a third of my career was in London, a third in Boston, a third in New York, I decided that advertising probably wasn't for me because at that time working in the London scene was brutal. It was a very hard industry to work in. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to retrain. And so I started retraining over a number of years after work, every weekend as a psychotherapist. So it took me years to train. And as part of that, one of the specializations I was most interested in was clinical hypnotherapy. So not the kind of hypnotherapy that you see stage performers do, which is unethical and really shouldn't be allowed. But the kind of hypnotherapy where you dig into somebody's subconscious and find out what really is driving their behavior. Because behavior and belief are really intrinsically interlinked. What I believe is going to affect how I behave and vice versa. And so one thing that I did practice very briefly, I didn't leave the industry until I was pregnant with my first two children. My first two children are twins. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to extend my maternity leave and actually try this. And so I set up a practice with a friend and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I found it very boring. And so I had an epiphany. I realized that I could take everything that I'd learned over the last few years, and I had been actively putting it into use in the industry, because remember, I was still working while I was learning. I thought, I'm just going to go back into being the best planner I can be with all of this knowledge. And it has served me ever since, I can tell you. Because Mark and I were having this conversation earlier, as we move more towards being very data dependent, and as we move towards over-testing things to the point of where they just stop being interesting, and we start to become part of this kind of regime of CMOs in particular having short tenure, so moving into do no harm mode. As we all get into that, we're forgetting what our industry is all about. And at the end of the day, it's about making people feel something. That when you make people feel something, regardless of what medium you're using, it's not all about television. It can be about any of the channels that are available to any of us. You make them feel something, you've got them. And 9 times out of 10, they cannot put their finger on why they feel that way. But you've triggered something subconscious in them that generally goes back to an earliest stage of their life. I continue to tap into that knowledge. It's probably the best thing I've ever done for myself, that and LASIK, although I still need reading glasses.
For me, the foundation, I think, was sitting on the phone books with my head under the old dryers in my grandparents' hair salon, where I spent a lot of time growing up. And I imbibed a lot of wisdom from my grandparents about taking care of women, what they thought they wanted, what they asked for, what they really wanted, and how to deal with the difference. I remember my grandfather, just for one example, saying, what do you do when a woman comes in and she says she wants to look like Marilyn Monroe, but this woman will never look anything like Marilyn Monroe? What do you do about that? And I was like, I don't know. And I'm maybe 6. Okay. So this is formative. I think this is why I spent the first half of my career mostly creating in categories targeting women, because I think I got a head start on that stuff and only really started to figure out men as an adult. And he said, you know what? You say, we are going to make you the best you can possibly be. And then you show her how. So the insight there is, why does she want to look like Marilyn Monroe? Because she needs reassurance that she can look good, that she can look great. And so that if you go right to that underlying need and you support, that's the experience that really keeps them coming back. And he had customers who moved to Canada, but would fly back to get their hair cut by Marino, my grandfather, and their hair washed by Nancy, his wife. So, yeah.
That's loyalty.
That's loyalty. So they certainly liked that experience that they were getting there.
I love those examples. All right, we're at our speed round. So this is where we ask fast questions. We have fast answers. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
What was your favorite subject in school, Mark?
It was philosophy. I'll tell you why it's philosophy. Because I love questions more than I love answers.
I love it.
Mine was probably organic chemistry versus inorganic chemistry, which I was terrible at, but I always got A's for organic chemistry because I love nature and I love understanding how things work.
Mm-hmm. So the tinkerer's mindset, understanding how it works. Mm-hmm. Excellent. What is a word you like to say in any language just because of the way it sounds or the way it feels on your tongue? Mark?
Merci.
Okay. And Lesley?
I love the word beverage. I don't know why. I just love that word. Maybe it's because it's got a V in the middle. I don't know. It's just a great word.
Wonderful. Is there a recent book or TV show or movie that you've seen recently that you thought, wow, that was amazing. I want everyone to know about this?
Last night, I watched the movie Easy A, which is like a high school coming of age movie loosely based on the Scarlet Letter. It was one great insightful gag after another that added up to something more. And so it was a wonderful little discovery.
Easy A. All right, I'm going to add that to my list. Lesley, how about you? And it doesn't need to be profound, right? It could just be something like Mark said. I love it because it was just fun.
Yeah, there's a couple of films, actually. There's one that I saw not so long ago, which you guys might have seen, called The Holdovers. Have you seen that?
Yep, I just watched it.
We went to see that film with no expectations whatsoever, and I just thought it was a masterpiece. I think that Americans do that genre so well, and it's been such a long time since a film like that has been developed, possibly even since The Graduate. But I thought it was up there right on a par with Graduate, because it was all about sacrifice and love and understanding and humility. And then the other film I want to plug, which may surprise you, is The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which I think is a work of genius. I really do. It's nothing to do with Walter Mitty, really. It's Ben Stiller. To me, it's his finest hour. And it's all about the death of art and the death of photography, the death of real journalism, the death of taking time with your craft and doing it brilliantly in exchange for the snacking of media and art, which we've evolved into, unfortunately.
Isn't that the Ben Stiller movie where he's on a longboard in, is it Iceland or somewhere?
I've seen that film about 6 to 8 times now, and every time I watch it, there are more subliminal messages. It's a genius piece of work.
I love it when that happens. For me, that's Back to the Future. You could watch that whole trilogy. Okay, what's a favorite challenger brand right now that you're looking at in any category? A brand who you think, keep an eye on them. They're doing some really interesting stuff.
I feel like I'm going to spout cliches and then no one's going to learn something new from this, but a Liquid Death.
Oh, you took mine. I can't believe you.
Oh, well, they sell a healthy product, but they label it death. So I love the joyous simplicity of their challenger marketing and advertising approach. God bless them.
I just interviewed Andy Pearson from Liquid Death earlier this week.
Wow. I'm going to touch the little square that you're in on my screen here just to see if any of it rubs off on me. Yeah, I really admire his work and what they've done.
I admire the fact that he's built a $1.4 billion business in a handful of years, which is extraordinary as well.
Do you think he's being himself now? I think he's probably being himself.
I think he's being himself 100%.
Lesley, any challenger brands that you are just in awe of because of what they're doing other than Liquid Death?
Yeah, let me think. I've got to think on my feet now. I suppose it is a challenger brand because it challenged the industry. I don't know if you guys have seen the advertising for Oslo, the Norwegian tourist board.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I love that. I love the fact that they have challenged the convention of the category where you show all the best parts of the city, the best parts of the countryside, the best parts of the people, and then you invite visitors, come in and join us and be part of this great community. And they've done exactly the opposite. They're talking about all the residents are obviously the ones that are unfolding the story, and they're just telling you all the things that are really unimpressive about Oslo that are actually really subliminally very impressive to the likes of us. So I think that's a genius piece of work. So I'm looking forward to seeing more from them.
In both cases, they're challenging the category conventions, right? Water brands look like this. We're going to be the exact opposite. All tourism ads look like this. We're going to do this. So it's a great technique. Is there a purchase either of you have made in the past 6 months that surprised even you because a brand managed to get you to take an action with some irrational reasons to believe?
Yeah, in my case, it's not a brand, but a category. I finally caved in and bought an air fryer. Because it seems the world and his mother has got an air fryer, and we used it religiously for 2 weeks, and it's just been sitting there on the kitchen counter ever since. And I'm mad with myself because of it.
It was society that kind of pushed you into the air fryer because everybody else had one, or was it a particular brand message?
No, it wasn't a brand message. It just got into the kind of the ether of our culture that you had to get an air fryer. because you can have fries that don't have any calories. And so I just felt compelled. At that point, the message had been drummed into my head so many times that I think it just hit my subconscious, and found myself going on Amazon and buying one before I knew it.
Mark, has anybody gotten to you?
We also got an air fryer, and everybody insisted we absolutely needed an air fryer, that a house without an air fryer was not really a home. So we got an air fryer, and we burnt out the delicate circuit in it fairly quickly with overuse. And now it sits there, like the black monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey, with no inner workings at all.
You guys both have the credibility badge on your counter that you are of the modern era, and you both have air fryers, even if you don't use them. That's important. All right, last question. What is a piece of advice that you got early on in life or in your career that you still remember to this day, or that you think of often?
I think it was a piece of life advice, which was just be true to yourself. I came from a very working class background. I'm from the west of Scotland, a very working class mill town. My parents were young when they had us and didn't have very much. And when I got into advertising in London, at that time, it wasn't really cool to have a Scottish accent or a Northern accent. It was expected that you'd have that Oxbridge way about you. And I didn't have that. And you have two choices in that instance. You can either pretend to be like that, or you can just be true to yourself. And I chose the latter path, and it worked out okay for me. But at the time, it wasn't really a popular choice. But yeah, be true to yourself, because if you're not true to yourself, you'll never, ever be happy. Shakespeare had something going when he said, to thine own self be true.
Whatever mask you wear is who you choose to be, or who you will end up being.
Yeah. Be careful who you pretend to be, because that's who you become. My first creative supervisor in an ad agency, BBDO Direct, was Eileen Carlson. She was a wonderful and is a wonderful writer. I was reporting to her, and I got my first assignment, and I wrote all this stuff real fast, and I brought it into her office. And she said words that have stuck with me to this day. She said, Mark, you're a bright guy. You're quick. I'm sure a lot of things have come easy to you in your life. This will not come easy to you. You are going to have to work hard at this, and you're going to have to get past your initial ideas, go back to your desk, work hard, come back tomorrow or the day after, and bring me something next level.
Dig deeper.
Dig deeper. I ended up with my first two ideas that I was really proud of in my career. So it became a little addiction to do it again.
Mm-hmm. The high.
Can I throw in another one? Do you mind?
Please.
That's more related to work, to our work. When I was a younger planner, I was working in a really hot agency in London, like the hottest agency, named Agency of the Decade. And I wrote a brief for a brand, I believe it was a bank brand, that was targeting 40-something men who were primary breadwinners. It seems very antiquated now, but back then that was a typical household. And the creative director at the time, who was also one of the partners and founders, threw the brief back at me and said, I don't like this guy. And he was one of those guys. He was a 40-something white male. And he says, you have to make me like him, otherwise I can't write to this at all. And I was very offended. What is there to like about these individuals? And they're old and they don't know anything and they're not cool. But I went away and thought about it, and then started digging a lot deeper and did more research, talked to people. And so I got into that mind space, and that changed everything. And so I wrote a much, much better brief. And he said, okay, I think you nailed it this time. And he wrote a great campaign based on that brief. Yeah. Like the individual that you are writing to. And if you don't on the surface like them, find something that you like about them, that you can empathize with as a fellow human being. And then great work will follow.
Oh, Lesley, I love that one. How you feel when you're doing the thing is how people feel when they receive it. So that to me, that's huge and applicable to so many situations. And so sometimes it's about consciously stepping back and thinking, how do I want them to feel? But even more than that, it's like, how am I feeling right now? And how do I need to be feeling to do my best work in this situation? Because however you feel, it comes across.
And what I'm hearing from both of you on this is find the human underneath all of the roles and the titles and the responsibilities and the cliches, find the human truth that is there and tap into it.
Always. Yeah, always. Very well summarized. We're humans working with humans, trying to inspire humans.
You guys have given our listeners so many things on this call during this interview. So thank you guys for sharing your time, your processes, and your insights. We really appreciate it.
This was so fun, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. It's great.
I always love hanging out with Lesley, and this is great.
Thanks again to our guests, Mark DiMassimo and Lesley Bielby from DiGo Brands in New York City. If you want to connect with Mark or Lesley, you can find them on LinkedIn. And make sure you check out Lesley's book, Super Strategist, which is a wonderful resource for strategists in an increasingly complex brand planning world. If you're looking for even more ideas and aha moments, be sure to subscribe to the Lightbulb newsletter at chriskocek.com/newsletter. Every Thursday, I share 3 aha moments that are guaranteed to inspire your next project, creative briefing, or campaign. Or check out my latest book. Any insights yet? Connect the dots, create new categories, transform your business. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform and share it with friends, family, clients, colleagues, even your enemies. Special thanks to Michael Osborne at 14th Street Studios for producing this episode, and thank you to Megan Palmer for additional editing and production support. Until next time, keep looking for patterns, finding contradictions, and asking what if more often.